I do think it's important to work smart, not just work hard, but we invest in companies all over the globe. And there are a lot of CEOs out there that will call you at 2 or 3 in the morning, their time. And having the vulnerability to stress about something or to just be very honest with you about things that they're driving hard at and super pumped about, or things that are really worrying them. Oftentimes, those are the best relationships you have between investor and entrepreneur. It's just that ability to be mutually vulnerable.
This is Andrew Votz, and you're listening to Choose the Hard Way, where I explore the obstacles people overcome to do great things with peak performers from sports, business, tech, the arts, the military, and many other disciplines. Please hit subscribe or follow wherever you listen. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to give this show a 5-star rating. It helps the show rank higher in search so more people can find the powerful lessons my guests share. Thanks to everyone who's taken a moment to subscribe, follow, and hit the stars. If you have feedback or want to recommend a guest, you can email me at choosethehardway@gmail.com. You are what you overcome. Choose the hard way. Neil Tolaney is a general partner at TCV, the storied investment firm that focuses on private and public high-growth technology companies. Notably, Neil balances his career with being the dad of 4 young children. With over $24 billion of assets under management, some of TCV's investments have included companies like Netflix, Spotify, Zillow, LegalZoom, and Strava. In this conversation, we discuss leadership, building high-performing teams, and Neil's learnings from his vast experience supporting companies through their journeys to become category leaders. You can follow TCV at TCV Tech on Twitter.
I came out of college. I started in investment banking just to learn as much as I could about businesses and finance, and had a liberal arts education. And it was interesting. I can't say I had a vision to become an investor even during that time and during that context, but I ran across a guy named Alan Spoon who was working at Polaris Venture Partners, and I met him. And he had this interesting hybrid of operating experience. He was the head of the Washington Post. He was on a bunch of boards for more traditional media companies, but those that had e-commerce becoming big and prolific parts of their businesses. And I met him, and I was really drawn to him. And so there was an opportunity to go work for him. And I was more drawn to the person that, frankly, than I was the opportunity to become an investor. And in many ways, I inherited his passion for investing. And, here I am today, many, many years later, and I love what I do. But, the initial days, it's interesting, was more drawn to a person than anything else, and the ability to learn from him.
Is there anything that you deliberately said no to, either from a skill development or professional opportunity perspective, that was maybe tough to pass up because you wanted to move in this direction?
I can't say that I have. I have had a bit of an unusual path to where I sit today as an investor. I've really explored both sides. So I've on the operating side, I worked at a company called LegalZoom 13 years ago, and had the opportunity to work for a great CEO then, and in a whole bunch of different roles in marketing and business development and finance, and I learned a ton. Actually, there's no greater way, I think, to have empathy for entrepreneurs than to go out and do it yourself, right? And so that was a great set of learnings I had there. And then I did that again after business school at a company called Personalization Mall, which is an online retailer of personalized gifts. And so I've really explored a lot of different areas, and I think that's what's really allowed me to have really diverse perspectives on companies. I can't say that I would have that today without those experiences, and I'm glad I did those. That said, I don't sit here today as a founder or an entrepreneur of a company, nor do I think I would be a great founder. And so I also have the humility to know now that's not a path for me without having to wonder about it. But I'm really fortunate to have benefited from a lot of that. There are folks who spend a lifetime doing what they're doing and continue to garner incremental learnings. And for me, it's really been exploring a lot of different things that's allowed me to come to at least my best self today while I continue to work on a bunch of weaknesses, frankly.
And what do you enjoy the most about what you do today?
I think it's a couple things. One is, just being at TCV, we really want to build our firm. And so just doing that in a leadership capacity day in and day out, and working with the great people that we have here who are talented in multiple ways, and also cultivating that talent and continuing to bring in new folks that are going to take us to even greater heights has been thrilling. And then I'd say the second part is, for me, this is the coolest job in the world. You get to interact with great CEOs and founders that are looking to build technology applications that are going to have the potential to disrupt many, many industries, garner consumer love and enterprise love in that context, and through that become seminal businesses, right? And so you wake up every day with this really enviable schedule to have that level of interaction and to ask some questions and frankly to be inspired by them. These are some of the most inspiring people I've met, and so diverse in thinking, in backgrounds, in gender, in ethnicity, and so I've really loved it. I've benefited a lot from that, and so it really is multifaceted.
Neil, I want to circle back to something you mentioned, which is just from your background as an operator. You mentioned that you developed this deep empathy for all of these different disciplines and expertise. And as you approach what you do today, I'm curious, how do the quantitative and qualitative sides of analysis come together for you?
Yes, it is a bit of art and science, right? And so you really can't be on one side or the other, particularly doing what we're doing. We're investing in companies that are growing really, really fast. They've manifested that growth in some way, shape, or form. So we don't invest in a startup day one, nor do we invest in companies that have hit that growth maturity and are no longer growing at a prolific rate. So we're right in between there. And so there is this art and science dynamic to it. The one thing I will say, and sometimes, historically, where we've made mistakes is when we've just haven't said to ourselves and asked ourselves this question, is this a great team that has come together to do something great? And there's just so much value in people that oftentimes, numbers can distort. And so we try to stay really, really focused on great teams that are looking to accomplish great things, but have also manifested some, something really tangible in that way. And then when we're looking, at companies that have the ability to be disruptive, there is an art to it, because in many cases, the most seminal businesses, this has never been done before. So you have to dare to dream as well as an investor, just as much as the founder is daring to dream that they can go disrupt incumbents with hundreds of billions of dollars of capital at their disposal. And so, it really is sharing in that and the people around that are a driving force. What I would say is that there are tangible ways to measure category leadership and how much share a company has, and importantly, what their special sauce is in driving that share of market. And so we spend a lot of time saying, hey, what is the moat here? What is that special sauce that's allowing you to do that? And in many cases, it's product-centric companies, right? Because they're building product that consumers or enterprises love. In many cases, have 80 or 90 NPS because they're just improving the way people are doing things at a dramatic level relative to what the alternative is. And you can see the organic adoption and virality of that. And so you're onto something. It's just, for us, a critical question is how does that product market fit scale with the benefit of great teams and great people? And so we spent a lot of time harmonizing that art and science in a way to give us conviction.
On the people side, you mentioned the power of great teams or highly effective, high performance teams. Is there anything when you encounter a team for the first time that jumps out at you that provides indicator or signal that they are a truly great team? Or is that something you discover over time through due diligence and going deeper with the people involved?
Yeah. So, in the beginning stages, I would say first impressions that over time, we're all learning from each other. I would say the first impressions to me are, does a team have hunger? I just don't think there's a replacement for that, right? Again, these are companies oftentimes in their growth stages, they're daring to be great. If you're daring to be great and you're not hungry to win, I think it is hard to win, just like in anything in life, right? And so I'd say that is a core quality that we look for. We look to pair that with also humility to be able to take on tough questions, to answer them, and not be overly stubborn around making the requisite changes that will allow the product or the company to be that much better, right? And so there's this intersection of this Venn diagram. We have to be hungry, confident enough, and almost, at the border at times of overconfident in order to make these great changes. But you have to have humility to know that you don't have all the answers, that there's places to go to help, and that that's oftentimes a precursor to entrepreneurs that are very open to bringing on the next great leaders of the company, because they recognize that they need to complement themselves on areas that they just may have blind spots or they just don't have those capabilities today. And that's how I think great companies continue to flourish. So I'd say that's one. The second thing that we look at is a vision very clearly articulated? Does a product roadmap exist that aligns to that vision? And does it, just on impressions of team, does it feel like the team has the composition of competencies and capabilities and hunger today that align to all of that? And so harmonizing all of those things almost in that cadence for us matters a lot. And so we really, really focus on the articulation of that and some of the tangible evidence that we talked about before and bringing that together.
What does hunger look like? What does the positive manifestation of hunger look like, I guess, versus hubris, right? So, yeah.
It's a great question. Sometimes there is an art to this, right? There are CEOs today. It's interesting. Not that I do think it's important to work smart, not just work hard. But we invest in companies all over the globe, and there are a lot of CEOs out there that will call you at 2 or 3 in the morning, their time, like. In having the vulnerability to stress about something or to just be very honest with you about things that they're driving hard at and super pumped about, or things that are really worrying them, oftentimes those are the best relationships you have between investor and entrepreneur. It's just that ability to be mutually vulnerable. But that to me is like people who just live and breathe what they're doing with such passion. And we all need balance in our life. I don't want to overemphasize that time in the day because that could be borderline unhealthy. But those are like some clear manifestations that we see in our portfolio today. I would say in the initial innings, a lot of that hunger is there's a confidence in the cadence by which teams are accomplishing things, and the rapidity of product development that they're putting out there that just shows that hunger, that hunger to align to a vision that they're so passionate about. Because vision alone doesn't do anything, right? They can be great mission statements. But I think, that concept of just these tangible areas of product that come out, that thrill consumers, the iteration against that, the focus on it, the surveying of consumers to ensure that that's all mapping. That's where you can see that hunger being more tangibly manifested and the ability to articulate that.
That makes a ton of sense. So to go in a slightly different direction, even with all of your success, what part of your job do you find that you have to work the hardest at, or do you find to be the most challenging to do?
I'd say a few things. One is you really have to block out the noise out there. We're coming off a time that's really been unprecedented in technology. COVID has created so much hardship around the world, unfathomable sicknesses and death, and has really been, a low point almost in human history as we continue to battle against the pandemic. For technology, it's led to rampant adoption, right? And so there's so much inspiring that's happening out there from a technology adoption point of view. And for us, what that means is that there's not only an incredible opportunity set, but also means that deals are getting announced every single day, right? And so the thing that's important not to fall into, I think, as a technology investor is this concept of FOMO, right? And we have a process here that's this combination of art and science that we live by, and we're going to have successes and we're going to make mistakes. There's going to be great companies where we wish we would have partnered with them for a variety of reasons. And I think we just need to live by that, have the hunger ourselves to have that desire to partner with great entrepreneurs, but also avoid the noise, because the noise could preclude you from going on and investing and partnering with that next great entrepreneur. So that's just one thing for me personally that can be, difficult to overcome, because we're all human and we all fall into this. And ensuring that our time spent, which is so precious for all of us, maps to what really matters. And so the things that I try and do personally almost every day is we all have this big to-do list. And I have a very good friend of mine who gave me this advice a while ago. In that list of 100, try and boil it down to 5. And for the other 95, all of which will matter, how can you resource that in an effective way throughout our organization to ensure they either get done or they're just crossed out because they don't matter. They're deep into the 20% in that 80-20 that matter for us. And so that's just something that takes a level of rigor in itself, because we're all a bit of perfectionists.
But when you do miss out on something, when a mistake is made, do you have a process for capturing, analyzing, doing a retro on that mistake to ensure that you handle it in a manner that you're happier with in the future?
Yeah, so we do have this, we do have a process whereby there are many investments that will come to our investment committee week in and week out. They don't all get approved. And there's a healthy measure of those that don't meet investment committee approval and go on to do really, really great things, right? And so I think we have the humility to know that we're far from perfect. We do make those mistakes I alluded to earlier. And so there's this combination of what we got wrong, either in the articulation of the merits of the fact that we should have done that particular investment, or was it really in the investment committee reception to that particular company? And that's where we get pretty rigorous in our thought process. And it's not trying to go back and create a false narrative on what happened, but it's really like, everybody talks about total addressable market, right? As a big term, you try to get pretty finite about it. I say a lot of our mistakes in the past is we just got the size of the prize wrong, right? And people try to be overmeasured around it, as opposed to seeing some of those art aspects I mentioned earlier. Do you have this great team that's super hungry, where it's the early innings of adoption of a great technology, and they are creating that prize, right? And so I think we've tried to be more dynamic about allowing the art to marry to the science, as opposed to being overly scientific.
And on the other side of the equation, What are some of the most predictable and common mistakes?
So on the entrepreneur side, it's interesting. Most of the companies we back are the CEOs are the original founders of the company. And so if you think about it, these are founders in the early days that were creating, that were really corely in product development. They were the VP of product, effectively. And then they graduate to a CEO role. And their job is to now ensure that they stay crystally clear on strategy, that they have an overall view for the makeup of product development and product roadmap, and that they're ensuring they have a great team. And what you find is that there are certain growth inflection points where that transition is really hard for founders, and they're just continuing to nitpick at every single product feature of the company. And while I sort of love it, right, because that was the very nature by which great companies were built, the problem with it is that it doesn't scale. And so what you have to do is sort of ask a series of questions of CEOs you work with to say, hey, is this inclination to do this because without you doing it, the next great iteration of product market fit around the globe is not possible? And how do you solve for that? Or is it because, you're drawn to it because it's what you're really good at, this is your baby, and it's hard to let go? Right. And I think we try and ask those questions because obviously these are very intelligent, very talented founders we have the privilege of working with. We don't want to be overly dispositive in our view, but through a lot of pattern recognition, we also know that you can't be so micromanagerial focused. That said, you have to be in the details. And so finding that intersection is really, really hard. And I can only sympathize with it sitting here where I am today. But I know that greatness will only be inspired if you kind of hit the middle of that. And so we try and make sure that entrepreneurs we meet with have the opportunity to meet with great CEOs in our portfolio who have gone through that rite of passage and are able to talk to folks that have done this well and have built huge global platforms. And so you can kind of see that more tangibly.
In addition to meeting with other CEOs who have made that transition, is there anything else that they do to make that leap?
It's a lot of trusted team. It's a lot of trusted team. When original founders feel most comfortable, it's that they know they've made the right decisions in the core C-level of the company and even the bench below that, to feel like, hey, this is really well situated. 80% of this is on autopilot and being done very well. And the other 20% is where I need to push these teams strategically. When people dive in, it's because they don't have as much trust. And so that's the push and pull that I mentioned before. But that, to me, that's more of the diagnosis of the issue that will be ameliorated over time. But if you don't feel like you have that great team to go execute on this, you'll kind of be you'll be that proverbial guinea pig that's running on the wheel, and it's going to be really hard to get out of your way.
And with what you do today, where do you find that your time is best spent and where you can have the highest impact?
It's evolved a lot, over time. Today, I think my time is best spent in, trying to lead the firm to the next great investments, whether that's on investment committee or new initiatives, or ensuring, as you mentioned earlier, that our process is tight and we have product market fit in terms of what we're doing on an everyday basis. Fortunately, we have 25 years of history, but we're constantly challenging ourselves to be great in those in the next iteration of the next 25 years. That's changed from doing what I was doing 10 years ago, which was looking at every individual investment and tearing them apart, and feeling very fortunate. I have a team today that can really assess businesses very, very well, and advocate for those where we're the best situated and where we believe those companies can be quite seminal. The tough part is always marrying that, because I love to be in the details. And so I'm just as guilty as some of the entrepreneurs I mentioned earlier, who in the case of our founders, who are immensely talented and can do things I could only dream of. But in my case, it's sort of how do I hit the intersection as well? And that's always a daily challenge, to ensure that I'm spending my time well between all of the details, many of which matter, but frankly, some of which don't. And so I just need to get out of my own way sometimes too. And maybe that's a level of empathy I can have with a lot of folks that are, obviously doing very, very big things.
And Neil, you mentioned getting phone calls from founders around the world who might be awake, like literally awake in the middle of the night. Pressure is a privilege, but even operating at a very high level, you have very high levels of stress. There's a lot riding on decisions that you and your firm are making. And I'm curious, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so first I would say those are the calls you love getting, because then there's trust in the relationship. So it's not a call you avoid, it's actually a call you embrace. And in many cases, a lot of those calls are quite cathartic, because there's a mutual exchange. It may start off with one person articulating a problem, but then it comes back to your ability to say, well, yeah, gee, I really relate to you for these X, Y, and Z reasons. And people get off the call and feel good that they're just not alone. Right. So that's the one part that I was to say I'd welcome it. In terms of the pressure, I just say, like, what we do today is a big privilege. Like, I just think back to my parents. I mean, it's been great to spend much more time with them, recently after everything that's gone on with the pandemic. But, they grew up in, partition torn India. They really had to make everything happen for themselves. And I've been very privileged to, have all of their support since birth and never having to go through any of their struggles, frankly. And my only empathy with them is the stories I hear. And frankly, those stories will remind me to stay motivated every day, almost living through them. So it is a privilege. When stress does happen, which it naturally does for all of us, I would say, like, you can't just turn to the Frank Costanza and say serenity now, right? Although
I wish we could, right?
I wish we could, especially given the way that Frank says it. It is awesome. I think you need to know your boundaries, and it's actually one of the reasons, like, I love Strava so much. Just to be very clear, like what really drove me to Strava was, it's not a central repository to just log your various athletic pursuits, although that's helpful in itself. It's really like how you get motivated from others. And if you look through the feed, so many people are saying, I got on this ride, I de-stressed, and I felt so much better afterwards. Right? Like, so I think it's people finding those boundaries in their lives where it's thrilling to raise a family, it's thrilling to do what we do on an everyday basis. It does get to be a lot. How can you manage that with doing the things you love, and exercising, and putting yourself in a position where you do feel like you have a balance that allows you to go do this for the next 30 years. And I will say that is one graduation point for me. I'm no longer, as young as I'd love to be, but I would say that 10 years ago, I had the mentality that, like, I should just be working 24 hours a day. And I think now I have the mentality of, I need to work really, really hard, but we're all going to hit a wall and break down unless we find that balance. And I love doing what I'm doing, and I want to do it for the next 30 years. So I have to have a longer term view.
To that point, is sleep a priority for you?
It really is, honestly. I had 4 kids, 5 and under at some point in time. And so sleep was, like, harder to come by, although our little guys and gal are very cuddly. So that does help. But I actually give a lot of credit to our founder, Jay, on this one. It does take leadership and lead by example to say, you need to find these boundaries and you need to do what's healthy for you. And he has really advocated for people to get sleep and get exercise. And during the pandemic, for all of us, but especially, there was a pandemic in Silicon Valley in another way, where people just could not see those boundaries and would wake up, go on their computer, and then shut down really, really late at night. and just had no time to go do any of these things or get enough sleep. It was kind of a unanticipated artifact of all of this. And so I do think it's incredibly important to get sleep. You think better. We all wish we could work out more. I'm one of those people that wants to work out increasingly more, and then find times to do recovery in other ways and do yoga and meditate and do all those things. You'll just find actually you'll be that much more productive. And I think it also intersects with what I said earlier, really determine what moves the needle, like what really matters, because there's no pride in activity alone if it isn't driving towards something that you think is really important. And so I think that's what I've tried to become better at. I'm far from perfect, to be clear, but it's something I try to remind myself.
That's awesome. Well, Neil, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for being a guest here.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. This was great. Enjoyed talking with you.
If you have questions, comments, feedback, or want to suggest a guest, please reach out to @HardwayPod on social or email me at choosethehardway@gmail.com. I've had times in my life when I've been in hot pursuit of my dreams and gave up when I hit obstacles I didn't think I could overcome. After more than 2 decades working with the world's top performers, I've learned that to be the best in the world or just find your own personal best, you have to choose the hard way. There aren't shortcuts or hacks that will get you there. And you're going to fail over and over and over along the way. Through Choose the Hard Way, I hope to empower more people to reach beyond who they think they are and just keep going, no matter what they encounter in life, so that they can reach their goals and dreams. You can help me make it happen. When you take a moment to subscribe to Choose the Hard Way, leave a review and rate the show on iTunes or wherever you listen. It only takes 30 seconds. I truly appreciate it, and so will the people who you help to find the show. You can also sign up for the Choose the Hard Way newsletter to get more information about episodes, guests, and other awesome things when you go to choosethehardway.com/newsletter. You are what you overcome. Choose the hard way.